In a surprising turn of events, Melania Trump walks into a hospital, where an encounter with a sick boy sets the stage for a heart-wrenching moment you won't see coming. It was an ordinary day at a Washington, D.C. hospital when whispers of a high-profile visitor spread like wildfire. Nurses and doctors hurriedly prepared for the unexpected guest. Soon, a sleek black Mercedes arrived, and out stepped Melania Trump, known for her unannounced visits to hospitals and charities. This time, however, her visit would become an extraordinary story of compassion and connection. As she made her way through the hospital, handing out gifts and consoling the children, Melania stumbled upon a peculiar room. Through the window in the door, she saw her own pictures on the wall and a boy lying in bed, seemingly indifferent to the world. Without hesitation, she entered the room, her bag of gifts in hand. "Oh my God, you're here!" the little boy exclaimed, his face lighting up with a smile that seemed to erase all his worries. Melania, slightly puzzled, turned to the doctor beside her and asked, "Why is he so happy? What's going on?" The doctor leaned in and whispered, "This boy has been dreaming of meeting you ever since he arrived here." Suddenly, memories of the letters and calls from a young boy who had always wanted to meet her flooded her mind, but she quickly dismissed the thought, whispering to herself, "No, it can't be him." She turned her focus back to the boy, who appeared genuinely content. She handed him a few gifts, praising his bravery. As the boy received the gifts, his joy turned to tears. "Thank you," he whispered. Seeing him cry, Melania was struck by a wave of emotions. It wasn't what she had expected. Without thinking, she leaned closer to the boy and asked, Hey, why are you crying?" hoping to comfort him. His unexpected response made her think of her own children. "I'm happy to see you. I never thought I'd get the chance to meet you in this lifetime." She hugged the little boy, her arms wrapping around him with a warmth that seemed to offer more comfort than words ever could. She turned to the doctor, her voice trembling. "What does he mean?" The doctor, his face clouded with sorrow, met her gaze. "He's suffering from a rare disease, ma'am, and without treatment, his chances of survival are none." His words hung heavy in the air, each one adding weight to the growing silence. Melania's eyes drifted back to the boy. In his fragile face she saw an echo of her young Baron, always terrified of losing her, even as a child. She recalled the painful days when Baron fought an illness, but unlike this boy, he had every resource at his disposal. This child, however, had nothing. Her heart clenched. She knelt beside him and, with all the strength she could muster, said, "Don't say that. Look, I'm here." The boy's tear-filled eyes lifted to hers, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Did you read the poems I used to send you every Saturday?" Melania froze, a cold shiver running down her spine. She had indeed read the poems, though she never knew who sent them. Her mind raced, trying to recall the name signed at the end of each poem, but the memory eluded her. Finally, she nodded, speaking softly, "Yes, the ones with Picasso as the hero." A deep silence fell over the room. The nurses, who had been going about their duties, froze. The doctor's face tightened with surprise, and the boy's parents, who had just arrived, looked on in stunned silence. Even the boy himself seemed momentarily speechless, as if he had expected nothing more than a polite response, not one that struck so close to the heart. The boy's face lit up with a cherished smile as he quickly replied, "Yes, that's what I'm talking about." His voice softened with disbelief. "You do read them. I thought they went straight into your bin." At that moment, Melania realized that this was the same boy who had sent her those hopeful letters, each one filled with optimism. She was astonished by the coincidence, especially in this heart-wrenching situation. She admired his wit and the depth of his writing. "Oh, yes, they're amazing," she responded, genuinely moved. The boy's eyes brightened at her words, and without hesitation he wrapped his arms around her in a tight embrace. The simple acknowledgement of his poems meant more to him than words could express. Melania, unfazed by the spontaneity of the hug, returned it warmly. The tender moment was captured by a nearby staff nurse who couldn't help but comment, Isn't this adorable? I never thought people like her would care so much about others." The room seemed to share a quiet sense of joy at the unexpected display of compassion, something none of them had witnessed before in such a raw, unguarded form. Melania pulled back slightly, still holding the boy, and asked softly, "So, what does this brave boy like to do?" The question struck him deeply, and fresh tears welled up in his eyes. "I always wanted to draw like the great Picasso," he murmured, his voice breaking. "But I didn't have the resources, and now this sickness has taken everything from me." Hearing this, Melania's heart ached, a wave of sorrow and empathy washing over her. She couldn't just stand by and let this moment pass without doing something. Wiping his tears gently, she spoke with calm determination. "Well, it didn't stop you from sending me those letters. It won't stop you now. What do you need?" Just then, his parents intervened, their voices filled with concern. "You don't have to do this," they said. "You've already done so much just by visiting him." Melania looked around at the people gathered in the room and said with unwavering conviction, "We're in this together. Don't worry, I admire his creative mind. I wonder what he could do when he has everything he needs." Her response left everyone speechless, even the doctors. They were accustomed to influential figures visiting the hospital, often leaving behind expensive gifts, but this was something entirely different. This wasn't charity, it was genuine care. The doctor exchanged a surprised glance with his assistant and muttered, "I never thought Trump could have such a big heart." His staff nodded in agreement, their admiration clear. It wasn't spite. They were all deeply inspired by what they had just witnessed. The boy, visibly energized by her words, immediately began listing the tools he would need, speaking with enthusiasm. "And don't forget the brush," he said with emphasis. "I need a flathead brush, Picasso's favorite. That's how he did it." The room, which had been heavy with sadness, suddenly lightened with laughter. Melania looked on in amazement, not only at the boy's knowledge but also at the raw talent that had been hidden away due to his illness and lack of resources. She quickly grabbed her phone and called her team, urgently instructing them to bring all the supplies the boy had requested, especially the brush. "Do not miss the brush," she said, and her enthusiasm sparked another round of laughter. Even the doctors, amazed by her selflessness, couldn't help but smile. After a moment, Melania continued her conversation with the boy, listening to his dreams and the heartbreak of watching them fade. Her team returned, carrying the requested tools. "Here you go," Melania said, handing them over to the boy. The boy's excitement was palpable as he eagerly examined the tools. His joy brought a smile to Melania's face, and in that moment she felt more fulfilled than ever. His parents, overcome with gratitude, whispered, "Thank you," to which Melania replied softly, "I'm a parent too. I'd do anything to see my little one smile." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring everyone in the room, including the nurses who were still capturing the moment with their cameras. They all knew this day would be one they'd remember for the rest of their lives. As the boy sifted through his new tools, his eyes lit up when he spotted the brush. "Oh, my Picasso, you've been missed," he exclaimed with a smile. The room, once filled with sorrow, now shared in the joy of the boy's small triumph. It was a poignant reminder of the power of creativity and passion, even in the face of hardship. The fact that a young boy, so sick, could be so attached to these tools of artistry in a world focused on content creation was a lesson in perseverance and inspiration that none of them would soon forget. As the boy eagerly examined his new tools, Melania asked with a smile, "So, why don't you draw something for us?" Her schedule was tight, but something about the moment made her want to stay. She immediately called her secretary and canceled all her evening plans, deciding that this was more important. The boy, his eyes bright with curiosity, asked, "Should I draw you?" Laughter spread through the room, as if everyone thought he was joking. Melania, intrigued, responded with a playful tone, "Really? You can do that?" The boy, unfazed, pointed to the portraits he had drawn of her using only a pencil. "If I can do that with just a pencil," he said confidently, "I can surely do more with all these tools." Melania took a moment to look at the portraits, her admiration growing as she realized the depth of his talent. Without hesitation, she said, "Yes, let's try this." The boy's excitement grew as he arranged his brushes and paints. "Please, stay still," he requested, his voice earnest as he began the drawing. With brushes in hand, he worked with an intensity that made him seem older than his years. Despite his small frame, there was no doubt that his focus and determination were immense. At one point, he reached for another brush but couldn't reach it. Melania offered to help, but since she was the subject, she couldn't move. The nurse, who had been quietly capturing the moment, quickly stepped in and handed him the brush. The room seemed to pause, everyone watching as this simple yet profound act unfolded. The nurse continued to take photos, preserving a moment that felt significant to everyone present. Melania, grateful for the nurse's help, stayed still, her eyes fixed on the boy as he continued his work. After a few moments, she asked, "How much time is left?" The boy, without looking up, shushed her gently. "It's almost done, just giving it the final touches." Melania smiled inwardly, not wanting to disrupt the boy's concentration. Time seemed to stretch on as he worked, lost in his art. Then, suddenly, he shouted with joy, "It's done!" Melania stood up and rushed over to see the painting. Her breath caught in her throat as she gazed at the portrait. "You're really talented," she exclaimed, her voice filled with awe. "Oh my God, this looks exactly like me." She felt a surge of happiness but also sadness, knowing that such talent was confined to a hospital room. As the boy beamed at her, she thought that perhaps there was more she could do for him. "You're really great," she said with sincerity. "I want to buy this from you." The boy looked surprised. "I wasn't going to sell it," he replied. "It was for you as a gift." His words were simple but profound. How could a boy facing so much hardship think of giving a gift to someone else? The nurse, witnessing the exchange, couldn't help but smile. "He's so cute," she murmured. Moved by his generosity, Melania turned to her team and asked them to carefully take the painting. She then leaned down to give the boy one last hug, her voice soft and kind. "You will do amazing things in your life," she said, her words a promise of belief in his potential. The boy, touched by her support, looked up at her with gratitude. "Thank you for being here for me," he said, his smile brighter than it had been all day. In that moment, he felt a happiness that outshone everything, more than even Melania had seen in him when they first met. Melania wished she could stay longer with the boy, but time was slipping away. She reluctantly said her goodbyes, her heart heavy with the connection they had shared. As she turned to leave the room, she briefly stopped to speak with the doctor, who shared troubling news. "The cost of treatment is astronomical," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "His parents may not be able to afford it." Hearing this, Melania's heart ached. She walked over to the parents, who had been quietly watching from the side, and gently placed a hand on their shoulders. "Your son is truly talented," she said, her voice soft but firm. "And it breaks my heart to see him suffer like this." Tears welled up in the parents' eyes, and the father's voice cracked as he spoke. "We've spent every penny we had trying to get him better," he said, his words heavy with despair. "We've got nothing left. It feels like the world has ended for us." Melania stood quietly, listening as the parents shared their heartbreaking story. They told her of how they had sold everything they owned, property, valuables, anything they could part with, in a desperate attempt to save their son. In their eyes, Melania saw not just grief, but the exhaustion of parents who had fought every possible battle, only to face the harsh reality of their circumstances. As they spoke, she understood the depth of their sacrifice, and her resolve to help grew stronger. She quickly asked her team for the envelope which she was carrying to donate for fundraising. As Melania handed the envelope to the boy's parents, she paused for a moment, her gaze drifting to the boy's face, still so full of life despite the illness that shadowed him. She didn't need to hear the words of gratitude from the parents. She knew that what she was doing wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about press conferences or headlines. It was about seeing a moment of hope in someone else's eyes, no matter how small, and knowing that her actions, however quiet, could make a difference. "What would you have done if you were in my place?" the parents had asked her earlier. The question lingered in her mind as she thought of her own children, her own sense of fear and longing whenever they were unwell. She didn't want anyone, especially a child so full of potential, to feel as if the world was closing in on them. She didn't want him to be defined by his circumstances. She looked back at the parents, now in tears, but with a spark of hope she hadn't seen before. Her heart ached, but she smiled softly, knowing she had done the right thing. "I'm just a mother," she thought quietly to herself. "I'll do what I would want for my own children." The act of kindness wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about the change she could foster, no matter how subtle. No one had to know. The ripples of her gesture would speak for themselves. Melania quickly walked towards the hospital administration, her steps purposeful. She handed them an envelope, her voice steady as she said, "This is for everyone who deserves a second chance." Melania, with her signature grace, walked out of the hospital, leaving behind an air of hope and gratitude. Before stepping into her car, she paused for a moment, looking back at the hospital building. She seemed to be reflecting on the lives she had touched that day. Her simple yet profound actions weren't done for recognition, but fate had other plans. Inside the hospital, the nurse who had captured the heartfelt moment with her camera decided to share it with her social media followers. "Compassion like this reminds us all of the good in humanity," she captioned the photo, showing Melania gently comforting the boy and handing the envelope to his teary-eyed parents. The post quickly garnered attention, with thousands of comments pouring in from people around the globe. "This is what the world needs," one comment read. Others shared personal stories of how small acts of kindness had changed their lives. Within hours, the images went viral, being shared by news outlets, celebrities, and organizations advocating for empathy and philanthropy. Touched by the overwhelming response, people started donating to the hospital as well, inspired by Melania's actions. Donations poured in from across the globe, funding not only the playrooms and educational supplies Melania initiated, but also new equipment for the hospital's pediatric wing. The hospital soon became a beacon of hope for families in need, symbolizing the ripple effect of one person's generosity. Meanwhile, Melania remained out of the spotlight, unaware of the movement she had unintentionally sparked. For her, it was never about the attention. It was about doing what was right. But as stories of her kindness continued to spread, the world couldn't help but admire the quiet strength and empathy she had shown. If this story has inspired you, you'll love what's next. Subscribe to watch more.